When you hear the word Denmark, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably charming cities, maybe some fairy tales, a flat, green country right in the heart of Europe. But what if I told you that the Denmark you're picturing is just a tiny piece of a much, much larger puzzle? A kingdom that stretches across oceans, climates, and even continents. Let's peel back the layers and discover the true, surprising scale of the Danish realm.
And here it is, the one we all know, the postcard shot, right? Copenhagen's colorful harbors, the fields of Jutland. This is metropolitan Denmark, a northern European nation with just under 6 million people. It's the political center, the population hub, but it is not the whole story, not by a long shot.
Because this is also part of that same kingdom. This is Greenland, an absolutely immense island over in North America. It's a world of ice and Arctic tundra so vast it could practically swallow most of Europe whole. And it's a land governed by its own people, the Greenlandic Inuit.
And yep, this too. These are the Faroe Islands, a rugged, windswept chain of 18 islands just jutting dramatically out of the stormy North Atlantic. They're home to a totally distinct people with their own ancient language and a culture all their own.
Okay, so you've got three profoundly different places, three distinct peoples separated by thousands of miles of ocean. How on earth are they all part of one single state? What are the invisible threads connecting the busy streets of Copenhagen to the massive glaciers of Greenland and the sheer sea cliffs of the Faroes? Well, figuring that out, that's the key to understanding what the Danish realm really is.
To really wrap our heads around this kingdom, you've got to look at the numbers. And believe me, what they show is a story of contrasts so extreme they just completely defy what you'd expect. Let's start with just sheer size. An incredible 98% of the Danish realm's total land area is Greenland. Denmark proper, the country in Europe, makes up less than 2%. And the Faroe Islands, they're a tiny sliver, just 0.06%. Geographically speaking, this is less a Danish kingdom and more a Greenlandic empire with a couple of European and North Atlantic outposts. But the moment we switch from land to people, the whole picture flips upside down. Over 98% of the kingdom's citizens live in Denmark. That vast, enormous expanse of Greenland is home to less than 1% of the population. The Faroe Islands, even less. It's a perfect mirror image inversion of land and people.
And these extremes really hit home when you look at population density. Denmark's a pretty bustling place, about 135 people per square kilometer. The Faroes have about 37, and Greenland? Just 0.03. I mean, that's not just low, that actually makes Greenland the most sparsely populated territory on the entire planet. So the takeaway here is that we're talking about a single state made of one densely populated European nation and two of the most remote empty places in the world.
So, the big question is, how does this incredibly unlikely union actually work? What's the political glue that holds these completely different parts together? Because it's not a federation, and it's not an empire in the way we usually think of them, it's something else entirely.
So the official term is Rigsfællesskabet, which translates to the unity of the realm. It basically describes a single kingdom united under the Danish crown, but, and this is the key part, two of its constituent countries have a huge amount of self-government. It's really more of a community of different identities, not one single common one. And how that self-government works is a little different for each.
Now, what's really fascinating is how this autonomy has changed over time. The Faroes have had what's called home rule, or hjemmestyre, since way back in 1948. Greenland got that in 1979, but then in 2009, they upgraded to self-rule, or self-styre. And trust me, this is way more than just a name change. Self-rule gave Greenland control over a ton of new areas, like their own police force, their courts, and, critically, their massive natural resources.
But that autonomy definitely has its limits. The Danish government back in Copenhagen still holds the reins on some key areas for the entire realm. The really big stuff: national defense, foreign policy, the constitution, the Supreme Court, and the currency. That all stays centralized. And while the territories have their own parliaments, they are ultimately part of the kingdom. And both Greenland and the Faroe Islands have 2 representatives each in the Danish parliament.
This whole unique setup didn't just appear out of thin air. It's the result of centuries of shared history, of colonialism, and, more recently, a gradual, negotiated journey toward the self-governance we see today.
The modern part of the story really kicks off in 1814. The Treaty of Kiel split Denmark from Norway, but left the Old Norse colonies, Greenland and the Faroes, with the Danish crown. For more than a century, they were just run directly from Denmark.
But after World War II, the push for autonomy really took off, leading to home rule for the Faroes in 48, then for Greenland in 79, and finally, Greenland's big Self-Rule Act in 2009. You can see a very clear path toward more and more local control.
And this growing independence has some really interesting real-world consequences, especially when you look at Europe. See, Denmark is in the European Union, but the Faroe Islands and Greenland, nope, they're out. In fact, Greenland is the only territory to have ever left the EU, which it did back in 1985. And why? Well, it mostly boils down to fish. They had a fundamental disagreement with the EU's common fisheries policy, and for economies so tied to the sea, that was a deal-breaker.
All of this evolution brings up some pretty profound questions. I mean, the Union has changed so dramatically in just the last century, and there's no reason to think it's done changing. So, what's next for the unity of the realm?
The biggest question of all, of course, hangs over Greenland. That Self-Rule Act from 2009 did something truly remarkable. It officially recognized the Greenlandic people's right to self-determination under international law. It actually lays out a clear legal path to full independence if that's what the people of Greenland decide they want. It would take a referendum there and a final agreement with the Danish parliament. But that door, it is officially open.
And this brings us to one final thought. The Danish realm is this complex tapestry, woven from shared history but also from separate destinies. It's a single state that kind of acts like a federation, a post-colonial relationship built on negotiation instead of conflict. So, as we look around at our 21st century world, is this unique model an elegant solution for balancing national identity with autonomy, or is it an old relic, slowly, peacefully drifting apart? The final chapter of that story is still being written.